Hi guys, this first video blog will be posted on my coaching experience WordPress, and I do apologise for the quality of the video. I do look a bit rosy, try to ignore that. Okay, so what I'm going to touch on is just some of the things that I've come across recently within lectures at the university. For the last 2 weeks we've been looking at something called practice. The first session itself, it was a workshop based activity, and we learnt about the different types of practice we've come across, when and where you should use them, and some of the advantages and disadvantages of using them themselves. What we need to understand that it's one of the main types of practice is known as block practice, and this can be the repetition of the same task. So within my sport that I coach, football, an example could be heading. So what you'd use in heading, you get the coach and the performer on a one-to-one basis, or you can use in partners within the group. You just get them constantly throwing the ball in the same position, and all you're trying to do is get the performer to groove the same skill and make them feel comfortable about the same skill. So in heading, you just constantly head the ball back, and it's just repeating the same task over and over again. Although this does look quite good in during execution of the skill, it does lead to boredom quite easily, and that's why coaches tend to avoid this type of practice and go on to either variable or random practice. When looking at variable practice, we need to understand it's the variations of the same skill. So again, we can use the heading skill, and we can add variations to that. So for example, this time the coach could throw the ball left or right of the performer, and this gets the performer thinking, and it's not just constantly the same skill. So they might have to move left or right, so that improves the balance, works on other key concepts that they're thinking about in the game. This is a little bit less boring, but obviously can still be quite tedious throughout performance. The third and final type of practice we've come across does actually quite often get mixed up with variable practice, and a lot of people struggle to see the difference between variable practice and random practice. And I think it's key in knowing the actual difference and the benefits they have. When looking at random practice, it's multiple skills incorporated into the same session. So again, blocked and variable, we've been using the example of heading, haven't we? We could actually use that in a random practice session. For example, we could use a game-like scenario such as head tennis, or head tennis is a great example actually, because you work on multiple different areas of the sport. So you're working on agility, coordination, balance, but you're also incorporating the main development of the session, which is heading. But you're not getting the performer to constantly think about heading, and it puts it into a bit more of a game-like situation itself, and it's less tedious for the performers itself. But sometimes it can look messy. And from a third-person point of view, people might think you're just having a game and not fully understanding the benefits of the session itself. Within the second lecture, which was the week later, we were initially supposed to be having a professional gymnast coach come into the session to teach us something about gymnasts and some of the types of practice he uses throughout his sessions. However, he didn't turn up because apparently he was ill. From that session, we went into the session. John announced the news that he wasn't going to turn up, which was a bit of a shocker. In the corner, there was a pile of mats, and John basically gave us a booklet and said to us, right, what I want you to do from now on, obviously none of you know anything about gymnasts or gymnastics, so what I want you to do is read through this booklet. He said this is going to be a very good activity for your second year coaching. Read through the booklet and come up with an activity you can perform to anyone who didn't know anything about gymnastics, and I want you to include a block practice, a variable practice, and a random practice. So we went off in groups of 4. There was about 5 or 6 groups, and we've read through this booklet. And the activity we chose was a handstand. Okay, so we looked through the booklet and we saw the correct way of providing it and the correct way of doing it. Sorry, that's just me being popular. However, we did struggle coming up with 3 different types of practice. For the block practice, I think we just had using a wall. So this is the wall and this is the performer, and the performer just constantly leaning up against the wall and practicing the handstand and back down, and leaning up and back down. Then we came to the variable practice, and we really did struggle about coming up with an activity. For example, we had members of the group saying, "Oh, I don't know, we could variation it, and we could use a different wall," which is quite frankly a waste of time, really, when you think about it technically. We were thinking about other variations of the skill, so it could be like, I don't know, you could have a target on the wall, and you'd have to do a handstand against the wall, and you'd have to hit the target with one of your feet. Okay, so we were thinking of all these different things, and we were just thinking to ourselves how bad the sessions that we were providing actually sounded, and then we came across the actual random session. Oh, and we couldn't think of anything really. We were just coming up with all different types of games, stuff like handstand tennis, which is just ridiculous really, because the performer may not know anything about handstands. Never mind kicking a tennis ball with their feet when their hands are on the floor. And we did struggle. And John came over and he said to us, "Right, guys, what do you think about this?" And he actually went through with us what he thought was right or wrong. And he did say to us, block practice doesn't mean actually have to be executing the skill straight away. For example, you could just put your hands on the floor when you're doing a handstand and keep repeating that to try and get the performer to realise that it's not all about the full thing, but it can be split into little parts, like whole practice. And stuff like that. So he said, why for block practice, why don't you get the performer to spread the hands shoulder width apart and facing the floor, and get them to work on the actual balance and where the hands should be and work on from there. So we were thinking about that, and after a bit of thinking, John stopped the session and he said, "Right, guys, from now on, what I want you to do, I want you to move to the group to your left, and I want you to have a look at their sessions and see what they've done, and see if they've clearly labelled it out, how to perform a session, and if you think it's good enough." So we moved to the left, and the group to the left of us had they had a forward roll practice, and we had a look at their random, blocked, and variable practice, and we thought, you know what, they've got an actual better idea than us. However, the block practice basically just seemed to be a list of instructions of what to do. It never actually gave you an activity of what you kept doing. And obviously, one of the first key things we came across in block practice, when you're doing a forward roll, what you need to understand is that a forward roll may lead to overuse injury, or it's actually quite a potentially dangerous activity if you're constantly putting all that pressure on the back, the neck, or the lower back, and stuff like that. So we did have to have a think about this. And then basically, after that, for their variable practice, I think they just had forward and roll backwards. And we thought to ourselves, technically, if they're just doing a forward roll and then a backward roll, it's not got a lot of variation. Fair enough, the skill's different, the variation's different. You're going forward, then backward. But then again, we thought this is just basically a form of block practice. They're just repeating the skill over and over again. So we came up with a forward roll put into a different sequence, for example. It gives the performer who's actually doing the skill a bit of creativity within themselves, who incorporate other ideas into it. For example, you could create your own gymnast sequence, so you could include squatting, jumping. So a sequence could be a forward roll, squat, a jump, a forward roll, a backward roll, a jump, and it's basically giving the performer a bit of something they can come up with and create their own sequence that they could show back to all the groups, which is actually still learning and developing the skill, but with their own twist on it. And for the final type of practice, they were using random practice, and they've kind of put it into a game-like situation. But for example, I think they used the traffic cone idea, where a red one was a forward roll and a green was a backward roll, and then after that you're just jogging round. Obviously, we did think this was quite a good idea, but we thought it'd get very tedious very, very soon. So we put a bit of a twist in it and decided to change the activity to a game known as Stuck in the Mud, where if you're tugged by a person who's on, you have to stand in the shape. We put the only reason you can get out of the shape is by doing a roly-poly next to someone, or a forward roll next to someone, and that would free them. Then again, you're incorporating all different types of skills, but again, you're mainly focusing on the actual forward roll itself. So yeah, after that, John got all the session together, and he said to us, what have we learnt and stuff like that, and how could we use it in our own sessions. And from that conversation of the last 2 weeks we've had, I do personally believe that I've got a better understanding of where and when you should perform a different type of practice and how long you should perform it for. For example, if you had a grassroots local football team of a full hour, under fives who are really struggling to pass a ball, you wouldn't necessarily give them the same block practice for an hour about passing a football against a wall and receiving it back. Because obviously 5-year-old kids, it's going to be very, very tedious for them. And you do need to develop the game and stuff like that. So it did give me a great insight into what I personally thought was a better idea and how I should approach coaching, and how actually over the coaching that I've done, that I should use a mixture of the practices. So that's pretty much it really. It's quite interesting actually looking at people's different ideas about what they think should be performed in what cases and scenarios against my views, and it's quite good having conversations about why and what they think compared to what I think. So what I'm going to do from now on is, when I'm looking at my sessions, I'm going to have a look at the target audience, and I'm going to have a look at what the session is going to be about, and I'm going to try and incorporate all 3 types of practices. And my next blog is going to be related to why I've performed these types of practices, and was this the correct thing to do or not. I'd just like to thank you for watching. If you've got any tips or anything or any feedback, just give us a shout back. I do think I've learnt a lot in this previous session, and compared to when I first started the university back in a year ago in September, I didn't actually have a lot of knowledge on these different types of practice, and I just thought it was all just one type of coaching. And obviously I've progressed through the second year, and now we're starting to come into little concepts like this, and it's actually really helpful. So thank you very much for that, and John, it was a great session. Thank you very much. Cheers.